Sometimes love becomes so heavy that it begins to look like control. We carry our children for years, and one day we realize they've started carrying us, but not always with kindness. The afternoon it happened, the kitchen smelled faintly of old coffee and lemon cleaner. The sun slid through the lace curtains in thin, golden lines, drawing bars of light across the table where I sat with my son. The same table I'd polished for decades, where I'd bandaged scraped knees, helped with homework, and watched my boy grow into a man I thought I knew. "Mom," he said, his voice steady, too steady. "From now on, I'll handle your money. You don't need to worry about a thing." For a moment, I didn't understand him. I thought he was joking, or maybe I'd misheard. 63 years old, I still balance my checkbook by hand every Sunday. My pension may be modest, but it's mine, earned with years of double shifts, sore feet, nights that smelled like bleach in hospital corridors. But Marcus wasn't smiling. He sipped his coffee, eyes calm, certain, as if he were doing me a favor. "You've done so much, Mom," he continued. "You've worked your whole life. Let me take care of things from here." Take care of things? The way he said it, soft yet absolute, made my stomach tighten. There was a time those words would have warmed me, when he was a little boy, pressing a dandelion into my palm, promising he'd always protect me. But sitting there in that same kitchen 30 years later, those words didn't sound like love anymore. They sounded like management. I looked at him. The man across the table had my husband's shoulders, the same stubborn jaw, but his smile, oh, that smile, it wasn't the one I'd raised. It was polite, practiced, the smile you wear when you've already made a decision. "I'm perfectly capable of handling my own money," I said, forcing a small laugh to keep the peace. "I've been doing it a long time." "I know, Mom," he said, his tone patient, almost rehearsed. "But things are different now. You forget things sometimes. You nearly missed your insurance payment last month." It was true. I had forgotten once. One slip after 6 years of keeping everything together, and suddenly my competence was in question. That's how it starts, I suppose, the world deciding you're too old for your own life. I looked down at my hands. They trembled slightly, the way they often did when I was tired. My wedding ring was gone, sold years ago when Marcus needed tuition money. My fingers, once quick with needles and bandages, were soft now, lined with quiet years of work that no one saw. He reached across the table, resting his hand over mine. "Mom, I just want to make sure you're safe," he said. "It's for your own good." That phrase, "for your own good," hung in the air like a cold draft. Had heard it before long ago from nurses telling patients they couldn't go home yet, from administrators explaining why overtime was mandatory. It always meant the same thing: you don't have a choice. Outside, the wind shook the old oak tree, scattering leaves against the window. Inside, something inside me shifted too, a quiet cracking, like a floorboard giving way under too much weight. Still, I smiled, because that's what mothers do. We smile through earthquakes. "All right," I said softly, nodding as if I were agreeing to something simple. "All right, Marcus, if you think it's best." He brightened, relief washing over his face. He kissed my forehead, quick and mechanical, like checking off a task. "You'll see, Mom," he said. "This will make everything easier." Easier? For whom? I wondered. He stood, straightened his tie, and left his coffee half-finished. The door closed, and the kitchen fell back into its old silence. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, the echo of a lifetime packed into this small space. I stared at the empty cup, still warm where his lips had been, and tried to breathe through the ache that filled me. There had been many hard days in my life. The morning my husband never came home from the construction site. Nights I worked until dawn so Marcus could wear clean clothes to school, but none of them hurt quite like this, realizing my son thought I was no longer capable of living without his permission. My eyes wandered across the kitchen walls, faded photographs, old grocery lists, a note Marcus had written in crayon when he was 6. "Love you forever, Mama." That boy had once believed in me without question. What happened to him? I reached for the note, kissing the crooked letters with my fingertip. It made me smile, but the smile didn't reach my heart. I could feel a quiet storm forming inside, a mix of anger, sorrow, and something else I couldn't yet name. Maybe it was clarity. Maybe it was the beginning of a line I would finally stop letting people cross. The truth is, mothers like me, widows, nurses, women who have built entire lives out of survival, we get used to surrendering small pieces of ourselves. We give and give until the giving becomes our language. And one day, when someone tries to take what's left, we barely recognize the theft is wrong. We call it love. At night after Marcus left, I sat at that same table in the dark, watching the streetlight flicker across the curtains. I could still hear his voice, calm, confident, certain that I'd hand over everything I'd worked for. Maybe he thought I would. Maybe in the past I would have. But as I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window, I saw something in my own eyes I hadn't seen in years, a glimmer of defiance. The same look I'd had when I first stood alone with a 3-year-old boy and no husband, when the bills piled up and the world told me I'd never make it. I smiled at that reflection, tired, wrinkled, but still mine. Marcus might think he knew who his mother was, but he didn't know the woman I had been before life softened her edges. He didn't know what storms I'd weathered, or how many times I'd rebuilt from ashes. I picked up his half-empty cup and rinsed it under the tap, the warm water running over my hands like memory. The house was quiet, too quiet. I could feel the weight of his words settling into the corners of the room, filling the silence with doubt and something heavier: resolve. The time the clock struck midnight, I had made up my mind. I would let him believe he'd won for now. I would let him think I was old, tired, easy to manage. But deep inside, something had woken up. Something I hadn't felt in years. A storm was coming, and I was ready to let it rise. Morning light runs the length of my kitchen counter like a ribbon of honey, and I stand in it a while, letting the day warm my bones. Quiet after Marcus's visit is a different kind of quiet, alert, watchful. I put the kettle on and take the old tin box from the top of the fridge. Inside are the papers of an ordinary life, pay stubs folded into squares, report cards with stars in the margins, a birth certificate, and one obituary clip from a newspaper that no longer exists. I don't take it out often. Memory has a way of telling its story whether you invite it or not. Morning my husband died, the sky over Charleston was the color of tin. He was 29, a foreman on a construction site by the river. I kissed his cheek while the coffee dripped and told him there were leftovers in the icebox for lunch. He laughed and said he preferred the fried chicken from Benny's and winked at our son, who was 3 and still woke at night asking for water he didn't drink. Later, the phone rang and a man with a careful voice said, "There's been an accident." Careful voices are the ones that carry bad news. They take the shape of your name and lay it gently on the table like a thing that might break. At the hospital, there were men in hard hats standing with their heads low, and a doctor who spoke in angles, fracture, internal impact, none of it adding up to the simple math of absence. I sat on a plastic chair under a fluorescent light and held my purse the way a child holds a hand. I remember the smell of cleanser. I remember the way the clock over the admissions desk ticked like an accusation. Mostly, I remember the weight of my son asleep on my lap, his mouth open in an O, as if the world had surprised him and he'd fallen asleep in the middle of saying O. People came and went, some with casseroles and advice. My mother-in-law told me I had to be strong, then she cried into my shoulder until the fabric darkened. The church ladies sang at the funeral with a sweetness that threatened to undo me. After, the house emptied, and the quiet that remained was vast and unforgiving. Bills gathered in a neat stack on the kitchen counter, and the refrigerator hummed like a tired woman trying to keep going for just one more day. I went back to work a week later. The hospital was its own world, a river of need you step into and it carries you along. By day, I was a nurse's aide, my hands learning new kindnesses, how to lift a patient without hurting their ribs, how to tilt a straw so the last bit of water finds the mouth that can no longer bend toward it. At night, I cleaned tables at a seafood place off King Street, bleaching the wood until it shone, and the smell of lemons turned my hands into small, bright things that no longer seemed like mine. It is a strange trick time plays on the working poor. Days elongate, nights contract, weeks vanish. You measure hours not by clocks but by tasks. 10 rooms changed, 40 tables wiped, a bus ride where you sit with your eyes closed but never sleep. I kept a notebook in my apron where I wrote numbers, rent due, copay for the pediatrician, shoes for Marcus because he'd outgrown them again. In the margins, I wrote words I didn't say aloud. Future, college, enough. Marcus learned the language of absence before he learned long division. He was a polite boy, careful with his gratitude. He ate what was given, wore what was handed down, never asked for seconds if there was only enough for one plate. The day I promised him the world was not a grand moment, it was Tuesday with rain pressing the windows flat to the frames. He stood at the sink, rinsing his bowl, his toes barely reaching the rug, and asked, "Mama, when do things stop breaking?" I took the bowl from his hands, dried them on the dish towel, and told him, soon. That was the whole promise, one word made of hope and sternness. Decided that night that whatever it took, I would build him a bridge out of our little life, plank by plank. The winter he turned 7, our heater gave out. We slept in the front room under a pile of quilts like turtles under a log. It was the season the hospital cut hours, and the restaurant did too. I could feel the math closing in. That was when I met Jonathan Blake. He did not look like a person you meet if you were me. He looked like a magazine ad, the kind where men grin on sailboats in sweaters that never wrinkle. He arrived at the hospital with a bouquet so enormous it needed 2 vases. He waited in the hallway with a worry that made his face kind. His mother had fallen and fractured her hip. She was a willful patient, he was a faithful son. MS. Carter, he said the second day, reading my name from the badge. You've been so gentle with her. She says you have the only hands in the building that don't make her feel old. Your mother has a beautiful spirit, I said, which was true. She argued like a judge but said child with a softness that made me want to sit at her table and learn her recipes. Week later, his mother was discharged. He handed me an envelope I didn't want to accept and a card with a number I promised not to use. He shook my hand as if I were an equal. I put the envelope in the tin box and told myself I would save it for a real emergency, not the daily emergencies that disguise themselves as life. But life, of course, kept trying. The daycare raised its rates. Bus schedule shifted so that my morning route came too early and the next one too late. I started walking. On Sunday evenings, Marcus and I would make a game of it, playing our weeks like generals, which nights he would stay with Mrs. Porter across the hall, what snacks we could stretch into meals, when we'd go to the library where heat was free and stories were plentiful. I called the number 2 months later when the landlord taped a notice to our door. A voice trembled the way a string trembles when you pluck it. "Mr. Blake," I said, "I'm sorry to bother you." "You're not," he said and meant it. He covered the back rent and the heater repair and deposited money into an account he insisted was for emergencies only. "You're not charity," he said, reading my mind. "You're an investment I believe in. Pride is a good coat, warm and familiar until it soaks through. Then it weighs you down." Learned to set it on the chair by the door when I needed both hands open to catch what was offered. From time to time, a check arrived, quiet as a folded napkin, some months when I had not asked, once when I didn't realize I needed it until I did. He never made a show of it. He never asked for gratitude or obedience. He seemed to understand something I hadn't yet learned. Help that demands a performance is not help, it's theater. On the nights I cleaned the restaurant, I'd sometimes watch families linger over dessert. The fathers would push the last spoonful of pie toward the mother. The teenagers would roll their eyes and still laugh when someone told a bad joke. I would clear the plates and think, one day, that will be us. It's not that I wanted a new husband. Grief doesn't always leave room for replacements. I wanted a life that didn't tremble when the mail came. I wanted Marcus to talk about the future without checking my face for signs that it was too expensive. When he was 10, I took him to the ocean for the first time. Mr. Blake sent a note with a bit of cash and told me to buy some salt air. He rode the bus for 2 hours, and when we reached the beach, Marcus ran toward the water with his arms thrown wide like a bird that had remembered it had wings. We ate hot dogs wrapped in paper and let the tide wash the bottoms of our jeans dark. I told him the ocean is like the world, too big to hold but just right for listening. He tried to listen. In the quiet between waves, I whispered the second half of my promise. Soon, and I will show you how. Middle school, he was tall and serious. He brought home honor roll certificates like they were receipts for something we'd purchased together. The principal called one afternoon to say a local foundation was sponsoring an after-school program in math and robotics. The name on the letterhead was Blake. I called to say thank you, but Mr. Blake only laughed. "You and Marcus are doing the work," he said. "I'm just keeping the lights on." Keeping the lights on can look like generosity from the outside. From the inside, it feels like survival. There were months when I counted pennies at the counter while Marcus slept, fingers moving the way my lips would move in prayer if I still knew how. When tuition letters arrived from the community college, I ironed my uniform and took an extra shift. When the state university said yes, I ironed again and took 2. The year we visited the campus, oaks arched over the brick walkways like they were blessing us. Marcus touched the plaques under the statues as if history might rub off. He said, "Mama, I'm going to make you proud." "I already am," I told him. "Pride can be a river, it can also be a mirror." I signed forms until my hand cramped, loans with smiling names, grants with stern instructions. Mr. Blake covered the gap with a single check and a note that read, make sure he buys books and real food. Day we moved Marcus into the dorm, the air smelled like paint and beginnings. I made his bed the way I had when he was a boy, tight corners you could bounce a coin on. He hugged me hard, and I felt the shape of our years in that hold, thin and tough and stitched up with promise. On the bus home, I watched the city slide by and thought of the girl I had been under the fluorescent light and the woman I had become under so many others. I had bent like a willow and not broken. I had turned soon in semesters, then credits, then a tassel crossing from one side of a cap to the other. I rested my forehead against the glass and let the hum of the engine fill me with a tiredness that was not defeat but relief. People tell you the hardest thing in life is losing someone you love. That is true. They don't tell you the second hardest thing is keeping your promise to the person who remains, especially when that person is small and looks at you like you are the whole sky. I carried that promise like a lantern, even when the wind tried to snuff it. I carried it when the world got loud. Carried it when help arrived, unexpected and decent, and I learned to accept it without letting it replace my own effort. Years later, when the diploma hung on Marcus's wall, I stood in his apartment and touched the frame. He had done it. We had done it. He thanked Mr. Blake at a dinner where the tablecloths were thick and the waiters poured water like it was a ceremony. Watched the men shake hands and thought how strange and ordinary grace can look. Two men nodding over soup in a room where I still felt the urge to wipe down the silverware. If the past is a ledger, mine shows a long column of debits and a careful stack of credits labeled faith, work, and help. The numbers never balance perfectly. They rarely do. But they told a story, and for a long time it was enough. A widow, a boy, a benefactor who never asked to be called that. A promise that grew up into life. What I did not know then, what I could not have imagined as I tucked those papers back into the tin box and set the kettle to boil, was how a promise, kept too long without boundaries, can become a tether. And how a child, taught that the world will keep breaking until you fix it for him, might one day mistake your sacrifice for debt he's owed. The kettle whistles. Turn off the flame and pour the water over a tea bag that never seems to steep fast enough. On the counter, the tin box sits closed, its lid resting like a palm over the years it contains. I stroke it once with the back of my finger and slide it into its place atop the fridge. The apartment is quiet again, but not empty. The past has a way of filling a room with the kind of company you can't invite and can't dismiss. I carry my tea to the table, the same table where promises were made and later challenged. Outside, a siren wails and fades. Somewhere, a bus exhales at the curb. I take a sip. The steam fogs my glasses. Through the blur, I can almost see us again, me at 28, a boy with cereal on his chin, a man who doesn't yet know the word goodbye. I blink and the vision clears. Soon, I tell myself as if the word can still lift. Then I set the cup down and fold my hands, and for the first time in a long time, I feel the difference between carrying a promise and being carried by it. The night after Marcus left my kitchen, sleep came in fragments. The sound of his words still clung to the walls like humidity that refused to dry. When morning arrived, the sunlight felt thin, distant, as if it no longer trusted me. I made coffee, sat in the same chair he'd used the day before, and stared at the faint ring his cup had left on the wood. It felt like a mark, temporary, maybe, but real. Marcus had always left marks. Little ones at first, pencil lines on door frames to track his height, muddy fingerprints on the hallway wall after soccer practice, the faint scent of cologne lingering long after he'd left for date. Could still trace his growth through this house as though it were written into the grain of the floorboards. He'd been a good child, the kind you thank God for in quiet moments between exhaustion and doubt. He loved to read, to ask questions that had no easy answers. Why does the moon follow the car? He'd asked once, his small hand pressed against the window. I told him it was because even the sky wanted to make sure he got home safely. Used to laugh at things like that. I used to believe it. When Marcus was 16, he started wearing his father's old wristwatch, the one I'd kept in a box at the back of my dresser. It didn't work anymore. The hands were stuck at 17. But he liked how it looked, the weight of it, the story it carried. I thought it was beautiful, that he wanted to remember the man who'd loved him but hadn't lived long enough to teach him how to be one. Then came Vanessa. Met her on a spring afternoon when Marcus brought her home from college. She was beautiful in a way that made you hesitate to speak, skin like caramel and confidence that filled every corner of room. She extended her hand with a practiced grace and called me Mrs. Carter, though I'd told her twice to call me Gloria. Vanessa talked about internships, business strategy, and her dream of living in New York. Marcus looked at her the way a young man looks at the life he believes he deserves. I didn't dislike her, I just knew her. I knew the tone people used when they thought kindness was charity, when politeness was kind of weapon. For dinner, she complimented everything, the roast chicken, the house, even my vintage curtains. It was all said with the warmth of a candle that flickers just long enough to remind you it's going out. When Marcus walked her to the car, I heard her say, "You should really convince her to downsize. This neighborhood isn't safe." Downsize? I laughed to myself. That word has a special cruelty when applied to lives, not houses. After that visit, Marcus came home less often. He called, of course, short, efficient calls. "Hey Mom, how are you? Yeah, work's crazy. Vanessa says hi." The words always landed like someone throwing pebbles against a window that would never open. The distance didn't come all at once. It arrived in small, polite increments. A missed birthday dinner, a text instead of visit, a week that turned into a month without seeing him. Each absence found its place, filling the space between us like slow-growing moss. When they finally married, the ceremony was beautiful, outdoors, by the water with white roses and a jazz quartet. I wore a pale blue dress and smiled in all the photos. My seat was near the back, a table labeled Extended Family. I remember thinking the phrase fit me too well. During the toasts, Vanessa thanked her parents for teaching her to dream big. Marcus thanked her for believing in him. No one mentioned the years of night shifts or the secondhand textbooks bought with tip money. That kind of love, I've learned, doesn't photograph well. After the wedding, Marcus and Vanessa moved into a small but expensive house north of the city. He told me it was an investment. I told him to be careful. He laughed and said, "Don't worry, Mom, I've got this." For a while, things were fine. He'd call once a week, come by for Sunday dinners when his schedule allowed. Gradually, those dinners shifted. Sunday became every other week. Every other week became once a month. And then one day it wasn't about me at all, it was about the food. "Hey Mom," he'd text, "Vanessa's craving your mac and cheese. You mind if we swing by Friday?" I didn't mind, at least not at first. I'd set the table baked cornbread, roast chicken the way he liked with rosemary and lemon. They'd arrive late, full of laughter and perfume. Nothing but their appetites. Vanessa would compliment the seasoning, Marcus would check his phone, and I would pretend that this somehow was still family. But love without gratitude becomes labor, and even the most patient hands grow tired. One Friday after they left, I sat at the table long after the dishes were done. The air still carried their laughter, their perfume, their careless joy. I thought about the bills stacked in the drawer, the pension that never stretched quite far enough. I spent 4 years saving everyone else, patients, friends, my own child, but no one had noticed how small I'd become in the process. When Marcus called the next week, I asked if he could help replace my refrigerator. The compressor had gone out, and the repairman said it wasn't worth fixing. There was a pause on the line, the kind that makes you realize someone is measuring how much you're worth before answering. Mom, I can't right now. Vanessa and I are planning a trip, maybe next month. Next month. It always sounds like hope until you live long enough to know it's an excuse. Refrigerator died that weekend. I bought a used one from a neighbor and spent the next 2 weeks eating sandwiches because I couldn't cook. When Marcus came by again, he didn't notice. He just asked for sweet tea. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling fan turning above me. I remembered the first time he'd come home from college, how proud he'd been, how alive. Somewhere between then and now, pride had hardened into entitlement. Maybe it wasn't his fault. Maybe I'd built that in him myself. Mothers do that, you know. We mistake unconditional love for endless supply. A few days later, Mrs. Alice, my neighbor, stopped by with a bag of peats from her sister's farm. I saw your boy's car in the driveway, she said. Handsome young man. Yes, I said, smiling. He's doing well. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes kind but sharp. Doing well doesn't always mean doing right. Oria, I thought about that all night, about the difference between well and right, about how easily a mug can lose sight of it. By autumn, the Friday dinners had become a habit, a ritual of expectation and quiet resentment. They came, they ate, they left. And each time I told myself that next week, maybe he'd stay a little longer, ask how I was really doing, notice something small. But he never did. It wasn't until Thanksgiving that the truth began to take shape. I cooked for 2 days, turkey, yams, collard greens, pecan pie. The house smelled like every good memory I had left. Marcus arrived late, said they'd stop by Vanessa's parents first. I set the food out, and he said grace the way he always did, fast and thoughtless. Halfway through dinner, he turned to Vanessa and said, we should get Mom to move in with us. That way we can keep an eye on her. Vanessa nodded, a slow smile curling her lips. It'd be easier for everyone, she said. You know how forgetful she's been lately. The fork paused in my hand. Forgetful, I wanted to laugh. I remembered everything. I remembered every meal, every bill, every hour worked, and every tear wiped from his face. I remembered holding him through fever, through heartbreak, through the long night of his father's funeral. I appreciate the offer, I said evenly, but this house suits me just fine. Vanessa's smile didn't waver. We're only thinking of your comfort, Gloria. Comfort, another soft word with sharp edges. After they left, I stood at the sink washing dishes that didn't need washing. Outside, the streetlights blinked one by one, like slow, reluctant eyes, and somewhere deep in my chest, I felt something shift again, a small click like a lock sliding into place. Love, I realized, can make you blind, but blindness over time teaches you to listen. And that night, I began to listen differently, to the tone behind Marcus's laughter, to the way Vanessa spoke of we and you, but never us. Next time they came, I knew I would have to test the truth of what I was hearing, because a mother can forgive many things, but not the sound of her child mistaking ownership for love, and so I waited. Friday came like it always did, slow, tired, predictable. The clock above the stove hummed its way toward 6 o'clock, the time I'd come to know not by the numbers, but by the tightening in my chest. Fridays used to mean something different. A small glass of wine after work, music from the radio, a quiet evening in the garden. These days, it meant only one thing, Marcus and Vanessa. I had roasted chicken in the oven, the same recipe Marcus had loved since he was 10, rosemary, lemon, and just a touch of honey at the end to give it shine. Habit, not hope, guided my hands. I stopped expecting thank yous long ago. Love, it seemed, had turned into routine of service. The doorbell rang right on time. They didn't wait for me to answer. The key turned in the lock, Marcus's key, and they walked in as though the place belonged to them. Vanessa's laughter floated ahead of her perfume, bright and loud enough to fill every corner of the room. Hey, Mom, Marcus said, dropping his jacket on the back of a chair. Smells amazing. You outdid yourself again. He kissed my cheek quickly, a gesture too polished, too tender. Vanessa followed behind, perfectly put together as always, her nails the color of blood and confidence. Hi, Gloria, she said sweetly. I hope we're not too early. I smiled because that's what mothers do. You're right on time, I said. They sat at the table while I finished setting out the food. Vanessa took out her phone to scroll through something, her face glowing blue from the screen. Marcus poured himself a drink from the pitcher of sweet tea and leaned back, looking comfortable, too comfortable. Dinner began the way it always did. Small talk about work, about the latest restaurant they tried, about Vanessa's yoga retreat in Napa. I nodded in the right places, asked polite questions. When I mentioned my aching knees, Marcus didn't look up from his plate. You should start walking more, Mom, he said, his tone practical, detached. Exercise is good for you. I walk plenty, I replied. To the bus stop, to the store. The doctor says I'm doing fine. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't mean agreement. Sure, he said, cutting into his chicken. While all that could be heard was the soft clink of silverware and the sound of Vanessa's laughter, something on her phone, I looked at them and thought how strange it was to feed people you no longer recognized. When the meal was nearly done, Vanessa set her phone down and said, Gloria, have you ever thought about redoing this kitchen? It's cute but dated. Dated, I repeated. That's a nice way of saying old. She laughed, not embarrassed at all. You know what I mean. We just think you'd be happier somewhere easier to manage. Maybe a condo near us. Marcus nodded. Yeah, Mom, it'd be safer. No stairs, and we could keep an eye on you. I worry about you being alone here. The words landed softly but carried a weight I knew too well. I'd spent a lifetime being talked at instead of to. I looked around my kitchen. The walls I'd painted myself, the window where I'd once watched him wait for school bus. Every corner carried the ghost of some version of us that no longer existed. I'm fine here, I said. Voice steady. This house has seen me through worse than loneliness. Vanessa tilted her head, smiling the way a nurse smiles when telling a patient bad news. We only want what's best for you, Gloria. What's best for you? Another phrase that sounds kind until you realize it's just a cage wrapped in velvet. After dinner, Marcus stood to stretch. We'll take the leftovers, he said casually, gathering them into containers without asking. Vanessa carried dessert plates to the sink and left them there. No offer to wash, no goodbye hug, just a quick wave and the click of the door closing behind them. When silence returned, it came heavy. I sat at the table, the same spot where I'd once helped Marcus with math homework, where he told me about his first heartbreak. Now, only crumbs and cooling tea remained. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Air thickened with the smell of food no one had truly enjoyed. I thought about what Mrs. Alice had told me, doing well doesn't always mean doing right. I hadn't understood the depth of that truth until now. Marcus was doing well, good job, big house, pretty wife, but somewhere along the way he stopped doing right, and perhaps I had helped him forget how. I cleared the table slowly, stacking plates in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. As I wiped down the counter, I noticed a small envelope under Marcus's glass. My name was written on it in his handwriting. For a second, hope sparked, maybe a thank you card, maybe something kind. But when I opened it, there was a single piece of paper inside, a printout of bank transfer forms. At the bottom, Marcus had written, "We'll set this up next week. Don't worry about a thing." My fingers tightened around the paper. I could almost hear his voice saying it, the same calm assurance that used to comfort me. Only now it sounded different, like a decision already made. I folded the paper and placed it in the tin box above the fridge, beside the old pay stubs and memories of a life built from exhaustion. Then I stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet beat of my heart and the low hum of the house that still belonged to me. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept seeing Marcus's face, the easy smile, the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him gentleness. I wondered when that shift had happened, when my son had stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a responsibility to manage. Dawn, the decision had already taken root somewhere deep in my chest. I didn't have the words for it yet, but I knew what it felt like. A storm forming beyond the horizon, silent but certain. Next Friday, when Marcus came again, I would test him. I would see just how much of my son remained beneath the layers of control and convenience. And if there was nothing left of the boy I'd raised, then I'd know what had to come next. Because love, when twisted long enough, stops being love at all. It becomes duty, debt, or manipulation. And I had spent too many years confusing one for the other. So I cleaned the kitchen, folded the towel neatly over the sink, and watched the first light of morning crawl across the floor. The week ahead would be ordinary to anyone else. But I knew, deep down, it would be the beginning of something neither Marcus nor Vanessa would ever see coming. By the time the next Friday arrived, sky had already begun to change its shade, the kind of dull gray that sits between late autumn and the first breath of winter. I woke up earlier than usual, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stop thinking. The decision I'd made had been simmering all week, quiet and certain, like a secret too heavy to stay silent. The house felt still that morning. The walls carried the faint chill of an old building that has seen too much. I made coffee and drank it slowly, thinking about all the times Marcus had walked through that front door as a boy, mud on his shoes, laughter in his voice, dreams spilling out of him faster than I could catch. I wondered what he'd see when he came tonight and found this house stripped bare of everything he thought he owned. I spent 3 days selling things. The dining set went first, a neighbor bought it for $50 and a promise to take good care of it. The television went next, then the couch, the coffee table, even the lamps that had lit our dinners for decades. Every piece that left the house made the rooms whiter, the air quieter, my resolve sharper. I didn't sell them because I needed money. I sold them because I needed proof that I could still decide what was mine and what wasn't. Proof that my life didn't exist just to make other people comfortable. When the movers carried out the last chair, I stood in the middle of the living room surrounded by echo and sunlight. It looked almost holy in its emptiness, like a confession. That evening, I didn't cook, didn't set the table. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and waited. The house was silent except for the sound of my heartbeat and the distant rumble of a car engine outside. Right on time, the key turned in the lock. "Mom," Marcus's voice echoed down the hallway, then sharper, "Mom, what happened here?" Vanessa's heels clicked behind him, quick and anxious. "Oh my God," she gasped. "Where's the furniture? Where's the TV?" I didn't answer. I just stayed seated, sipping my tea. I rushed into the kitchen, and for a moment the look on Marcus's face reminded me of the little boy who once lost his favorite toy at the park. Wide eyes, disbelief, the beginning of anger. "Mom," he said again, loudest time. "What did you do?" "I sold some things," I said simply. "Needed the space." "The space?" He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "Are you kidding me? You sold everything. Why would you do that?" Looked at him, really looked, and realized how little of my son I recognized anymore. The boy I'd raised had been tender, thoughtful, grateful. The man standing in front of me looked at me like a problem that needs solving. "I needed money," I said calmly. "You know, for when you start managing my accounts. Thought I should have a little cash on hand first." He froze. The air changed. The words hit exactly where I wanted them to. "What are you talking about?" He snapped. "I'm just being practical," I replied, repeating his favorite word. "You said you'd take care of everything for me. I thought this might make it easier." Vanessa's face hardened, her lips pressing into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Gloria, you can't just sell things without talking to us. We come here every week to keep you company, and this," she gestured around the empty room, "this feels selfish." That word, selfish, sliced through me like cold wind. I thought about the years of double shifts, the nights I worked until my legs went numb, the meals I skipped so Marcus could eat. I thought of all the ways I'd made myself small so he could take up space in the world. "Selfish," I repeated quietly. "That's an interesting word." "Mom," Marcus said, stepping closer, frustration bleeding into his voice, "you're not thinking straight. You can't just sell everything like this. Now what are we supposed to do when we come over? Where will we sit?" It wasn't until that moment, until that question, that I saw the truth clear and merciless. He hadn't said, "Where will you sit, Mom?" He'd said "we," as if my home existed for his comfort, as if I were an extension of his convenience. I set my cup down and looked him square in the eyes. "Maybe you should think about that, Marcus. Maybe that's the problem." He frowned, confusion turning to anger. "You're overreacting. I was trying to help you, but you're making this difficult." "Help me?" I asked. "By taking control of my money, by deciding what I need." "You're twisting this," he said, his voice sharp. "You've been struggling, and I just want what's best for you." "What's best for me?" I said softly, "or what's easiest for you?" The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Vanessa shifted beside him, her arms folded. "This isn't good," she said coldly. Maybe it was a mistake to let her lie alone. She's clearly not thinking rationally. The word rationally sat in the air like smoke. I'd heard it before in hospital rooms and board meetings from men who thought authority made them right. It always meant the same thing: "We know better than you." I stood then, the chair scraping lightly against the floor. "Dinner's not ready," I said. There's no dinner. If you're hungry, there are plenty of restaurants nearby. Marcus blinked, stunned. What? I said. I repeated, there's no dinner. Vanessa gave a short, humorous laugh. Unbelievable. After all we do for you, this is how you act? I almost smiled at that. After all we do for you, Marcus's face darkened. You need to calm down, Mom. You're not yourself. Oh, I'm exactly myself, I said quietly. You just stopped recognizing me. He took a step forward, anger flashing in his eyes. You should be careful, Mom. A woman your age, alone, without family, could end up in a bad place. There it was. A threat beneath the concern. The reminder of my dependence, of how easy it would be to erase my autonomy under the pretense of protection. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him until he looked away. Then I said the words I hadn't planned to say but needed to. If that's supposed to scare me, it doesn't. I've already lived through worse. They left in silence. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the walls. I listened to their car engine fade down the street until all that was left was the ticking clock and the low hum of my heart. For a while I just stood there, surrounded by the emptiness I had chosen. But the emptiness didn't feel hollow. It felt honest. I walked through the house slowly, touching the bare walls, the empty shelves. This was what freedom looked like, quiet, stripped, unadorned. I realized then that Marcus's visit had given me something unexpected. Clarity. Hadn't come to take care of me. He'd come to claim me. And tonight he'd shown me exactly who he'd become. When I finally sat down in the quiet kitchen, the air felt lighter somehow. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, a low and steady whisper, as if the world itself was telling me what I already knew. Something had broken tonight, but maybe, just maybe, it was the right thing breaking. I stared at the door where Marcus had stood, his face twisted in disbelief, and whispered into the silence, You wanted control, my son, but you forgot. This house, this life, this woman, all of it was built without you. Then I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, letting the stillness settle like truth. The storm inside me was awake now, and I had no intention of stopping it. Following Monday began with the sound of rain tapping against my bedroom window. The world outside was gray, washed in a thin film of drizzle that made the street look like an old photograph. I dressed slowly, the stiffness in my knees reminding me I was no longer young, though my mind felt sharper than it had in years. The house was quiet, bare, but somehow more alive than it had been when filled with furniture and other people's occasions. I had spent the weekend thinking about Marcus's face, the flash of anger, the way he had said, You should be careful, Mom, as though I were a child. I couldn't stop hearing those words. They didn't sound like concern, they sounded like warning. I'd raised my son to be a man who worked hard, told the truth, and respected what wasn't his. But lately, I'd started to wonder if I had raised something else entirely, a man who believed love was another word for ownership. That morning, I folded the newspaper I barely read. My eyes landed on the stack of unopened mail sitting on the counter. One envelope caught my attention, my bank statement. For weeks, I'd been ignoring them, mostly because I knew there would be nothing new, just the same small balance that had been there since I retired. But something inside me told me to look. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that small, persistent voice that mothers have when something isn't right. I opened the envelope carefully, smoothing out the pages. My eyes moved over the numbers, deposits, withdrawals, balances, until they stopped. A withdrawal of $1, $200 from 3 months ago. My heart skipped. I hadn't taken out that money. I hadn't even needed that much at once in years. At first, I thought maybe it was an error, a glitch in the system. But I worked in hospitals long enough to know that systems rarely make mistakes without human help. My fingers began to tremble. I took a deep breath, grabbed my raincoat, and headed to the bank. The branch was small, familiar. I'd been coming there for nearly 20 years. Some of the tellers even knew me by name. Morning, Mrs. Carter, said the young woman behind the counter, her voice cheerful. How can I help you today? I need to check my account, dear, I said, sliding my ID and bank card across the counter. Something doesn't look right. She nodded and tapped at her computer. What seems to be the issue? There's a withdrawal I don't remember making, I said. About 3 months ago. Little over $1,200. Her eyes scanned the screen, then she frowned slightly. Yes, I see it here. It was processed at our downtown branch. Downtown? I repeated. I haven't been downtown in years. She hesitated. It was withdrawn in person with your debit card, Mrs. Carter. My stomach dropped. That's not possible, I whispered. My card's been with me. She looked uncomfortable now. Would you like to see the transaction details? Yes, I said firmly. She printed the receipt and handed it to me. The signature on the slip was mine, or at least it looked like mine. My hand began to shake as I stared at it. I knew that handwriting, but I also knew I hadn't signed anything. Mrs. Carter, the teller said gently, we can open a fraud investigation if you believe this wasn't you. I wanted to say yes, but I couldn't, not yet. Something in me needed to know before I accused anyone, before I admitted what my heart already feared. I folded the paper and put it in my purse. I'll think about it, I said softly. Outside, the rain had turned heavier. I stood under the awning, staring at the track sliding past, and tried to remember where I had been 3 months ago. Then it came to me. Marcus had stopped by that afternoon. I'd been in the shower when he arrived. I'd left my purse on the couch. When I came out, he was sitting in the living room, smiling. And he'd just been waiting for me. The memory burned through me like fire. I felt sick. That night, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. Old statements, receipts, bills. The room was quiet except for the sound of rain against the window and the steady rhythm of my breathing. I went through every line of every statement, tracing each number with my finger until I found more, small withdrawals here and there, patterns that didn't belong. It was as if someone had been nibbling away at my life dollar by dollar, hoping I'd never notice. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I brewed coffee and kept reading. That's when I found it, a credit card under my name I didn't remember opening. My heart pounded as I dialed the number on the back of the statement. Thank you for calling Lexington Financial Services, said a bright voice. Can I have your account number, please? I gave it to her, then asked when the account had been opened. Looks like this card was issued 18 months ago, Mrs. Carter, she said. Would you like to go over your recent transactions? Yes, I said, gripping the phone tighter. She read them aloud, hardware stores, electronics, furniture, my breath caught. Can you tell me the address listed on the account? Sure, she said, typing. It's 117 Brookdale Lane. I closed my eyes. That was Marcus's address. My hands went cold. Thank you, I said quietly. That's all I needed. When I hung up, I felt something in me collapse. It wasn't just shock, it was grief. Grief for the years I'd spent believing in him, for the sacrifices I'd made so he could have everything. Grief for the realization that my son, the boy I'd fed and clothed and prayed for, had been stealing from me. I covered my mouth with my hand, trying to stifle the sob that escaped. The room blurred. My whole life seemed to tilt sideways, like a picture frame coming loose from the wall. Don't know how long I sat there, but when I finally stood, my knees ached from being still too long. I gathered every document, every bank statement, every receipt, and placed them neatly into a folder. I didn't cry again. I couldn't afford to. Tears were for people who didn't have to plan their next move. The following morning, I went back to the bank, not to accuse, not yet, but to verify. I ordered complete printouts of my account history for the past year, and I went to the utility office to check my records. There too, I found something, an electricity account in my name at Marcus's address, unpaid for months. The woman behind the counter looked at me sympathetically. "You should file a report, ma'am. That's identity fraud." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "I believe it is." When I returned home, I placed the folder on the table, neatly stacked beside my cup of tea. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth. I sat there for a long time, staring at the folder until the anger began to quiet into something harder, sharper resolve. I had always been patient, always believed in giving people time to do the right thing. But this was different. This wasn't forgetfulness or selfishness. This was betrayal. And betrayal requires proof, not pity. So I began to collect evidence, one document at a time. I photocopied the statements. I lighted the withdrawals, printed the credit card transactions. I made lists, dates, totals. When the folder was thick and heavy in my hands, I closed it, set it aside, and looked around my empty house. It didn't look empty anymore. It looked prepared. Marcus thought he was taking control of my life. But what he didn't know was that I was already 2 steps ahead. That night, as I turned off the kitchen light, I whispered to the dark, "You wanted to manage my money. Marcus, let's see how you manage the truth." 2 days passed before I gathered enough courage to act. It wasn't fear of Marcus, not exactly. It was the kind of hesitation that comes from realizing your child is capable of something you spent a lifetime believing he never would be. Every time I looked at that folder on the kitchen table, I felt 2 versions of myself fighting. The mother who wanted to forgive, and the woman who refused to be a fool any longer. On Wednesday morning, I woke to sunlight breaking through the clouds. For the first time in weeks, it wasn't raining. Felt like a sign, a small, quiet nudge from the universe telling me it was time. I made my bed, put on my best beige coat, and slipped the folder into my tote bag. Downtown was busy, filled with people rushing somewhere, coffee in hand, their faces tired but determined. I used to be one of them once, commuting to the hospital at dawn, my mind already running through patient charts and medication lists before I'd even clocked in. Now I was walking into a different kind of office, one where my heart would be examined instead of my hands. The sign on the glass door read William Sanchez, attorney at law. I almost turned around before going in. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who needed a lawyer to deal with her son. But then I remembered Marcus's voice on the phone that day, cold, impatient, commanding, and I knew that silence would only make me smaller. The receptionist, kind woman in her 40s with a soft southern accent, smiled when I stepped in. "Good morning, ma'am. Do you have an appointment?" "I called yesterday," I said. "Glory Carter." "Ah, yes, Mr. Sanchez is expecting you." She led me to a small office with a window overlooking the street. A tall man with gray at his temples stood to greet me. His handshake was firm but not overbearing. "Mrs. Carter," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please have a seat. How can I help you today?" For a moment, I couldn't find the words. I opened my bag and pulled out the folder, setting it carefully on the table. "It's about my son," I said finally. "I think he's been stealing from me." I watched his expression shift, not surprise exactly, but something like understanding. He didn't interrupt. He simply nodded for me to go on. I told him everything, from the day Marcus asked to manage my money, the furniture I'd sold, to the discoveries at the bank and the credit card company. I spoke slowly, sometimes stopping to breathe when the shame grew too heavy. Mr. Sanchez didn't rush me. He took notes, his pen moving quietly across the page. When I finished, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently, "what you're describing is financial fraud and identity theft. Common than you'd think, especially when it involves family." I felt my stomach twist at that last word, family. It sounded foreign now. He continued, "If you sign any of the documents your son brought you, he'll have full legal authority over your money. Once that happens, it'll be nearly impossible to reverse. He could close your accounts, transfer your funds, even take out loans in your name." I nodded slowly. That's what I was afraid of. He folded his hands. "There are a few things we can do. First, don't sign anything ever without my review. Second, report the unauthorized withdrawals and the fraudulent credit card immediately. The bank will open investigations. Third, change all your PINs and passwords today. And finally," he hesitated, "if you believe your safety or finances are at risk, you may want to consider a restraining order." The words hit me like cold water. "Against my own son?" His voice softened. "Mrs. Carter, your son has already crossed a line. The question isn't whether you want to hurt him, it's whether you're willing to protect yourself." Looked out the window at the people hurrying below. Mothers with strollers, businessmen, young couples laughing. Life, ordinary and oblivious. I wanted to be one of them again, someone whose biggest problem was deciding what to cook for dinner. "I don't want to ruin his life," I said quietly. "He's still my son." Mr. Sanchez nodded. "I understand, but he's already taken a piece of yours." That sentence stayed with me. When I left his office an hour later, had a list of instructions in one hand and a folder full of forms in the other. The sun was bright now, harsh even, and I had to squint against it. The light made everything look too honest. I went straight to the bank. The same young teller helped me again, and this time I told her everything. She listened carefully, then helped me file an official fraud report. We closed my debit card, requested a new one, and changed every password. She asked if I wanted to freeze my account temporarily. I said yes. It was strange how something so small, clicking a button, signing a form, could feel like reclaiming a piece of yourself. From there, I went to the credit card company. The representative took my statement and promised an investigation. "You did the right thing coming forward, ma'am," she said kindly. "A lot of people stay quiet out of guilt." "I stayed quiet long enough," I replied. At the time I got home, I was exhausted. My body ached, but it wasn't the usual physical tiredness. It was the kind that sits behind your ribs, the weight of finally doing what you should have done long ago. I made tea and sat by the window, the afternoon light spilling across the empty living room. Then my phone rang. Marcus. The sound of his name on the screen made my pulse jump. For a brief second, the mother in me wanted to answer, to hear his voice, pretend we could talk it through, but the woman I had become in the lawyer's office told me not to. I let it ring. It rang again and again. Finally, I picked up. "Hello, Mom," his voice came sharp and tense. "We need to talk. Come to my house tomorrow for dinner." It wasn't an invitation, it was an order. I can't tomorrow, I said. I'm busy. Busy? He repeated, his tone rising. With what? Things that matter to me. He paused, the silence stretching like wire. You're acting strange, Mom. You've been making bad decisions lately. You're confused. Just sign those papers and I'll take care of everything. For my own good, I asked softly. He hesitated. Exactly. Took a deep breath. Marcus, I said, I know about the withdrawals, the credit card, the bills in my name. I've seen it all. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. What? He finally said, his voice low and cautious. You heard me, I replied, and I've already spoken with a liar. The mask cracked. You talked to a liar? He snapped. Are you insane? You're blowing this out of proportion. I was trying to help you. Doesn't look like theft, I said. It doesn't sound like lies. He exhaled sharply, his tone turning cold. You're being ridiculous, Mom. You're confused. Maybe it's your age, I don't know, but you need to stop this before you do something you'll regret. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Oh, Marcus, the only thing I regret is not seeing you clearly sooner. Mom, I ended the call. For a moment, I just sat there, my phone still in my hand. Hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I waited for a familiar wave of guilt, the ache that usually followed any argument with him. But it didn't come. Instead, there was something else, calm. That night, I slept deeply, dreamlessly for the first time in months. In the morning, I woke with a single, quiet thought. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about who I am. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my son, tell me who that was. By Thursday morning, a strange calm had settled over me. It wasn't peace, not exactly. It was the kind of calm a person feels before a storm they know is coming. The sun had just begun to climb through the window when I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, making lists the way I used to make patient charts back when I was a nurse. Only this time, the diagnosis wasn't about blood pressure or heart rates. It was about betrayal, about evidence, about survival. I started by writing down every account, every bill, every password I had changed. Then I made a second list, every lie Marcus had told me, every withdrawal I hadn't made, every favor that had turned into control. Seeing it on paper made it real in a way it hadn't been before. It also made something else clear. This wasn't just about protecting my savings. It was about reclaiming the part of myself I'd given away for years under the disguise of love. For the next 2 days, I moved quietly, methodically. I checked every corner of my financial life. Went through old boxes, drawers, folders, even my emails. What I found shocked me, and yet it didn't. Marcus had been using my name for nearly everything. A phone plan, an electricity bill for his house, even a small personal loan that had gone unpaid and was now hurting my credit score. Each discovery hit like a pulse of heat under my skin. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't even shake. I just took notes, copied documents, highlighted dates. It was like I'd turned into a machine built for truth. By Friday, I was ready. At evening, around the time Marcus usually came for dinner, I cooked. It felt absurd, almost symbolic, a ritual of habit more than hospitality. I made his favorite dish, the one from his childhood, chicken and creamy sauce with rice and sweet peas. The smell filled the house, familiar and bittersweet. When the knock came at the door, I was ready. Marcus stepped inside, followed closely by Vanessa. They were both dressed well, like people visiting someone they pitied. Marcus smiled faintly, cautious, calculating. Mom, he said, his tone soft but rehearsed. You look tired, have you been sleeping? I smiled back, polite but cold. I've been busy, I said. He glanced at the kitchen table where the meal waited. You cooked. Of course, I said. You always come hungry. Vanessa's eyes darted around the room, maybe noticing that the walls looked cleaner, the space emptier, like a stage set for a scene she didn't yet understand. Sat down, and for a few minutes the illusion of normalcy played out. We talked about nothing. The weather, Vanessa's job, the neighbor's barking dog, but underneath every word was the same electric tension that comes before lightning strikes. When the plates were nearly empty, Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. Mom, he said, pushing them toward me. These are the documents I told you about, just a few signatures. I can start handling things for you. It'll take a lot of stress off your plate. I looked at the papers without touching them. I had already seen this performance before. The soft tone, the smile that didn't reach his eyes, the false concern wrapped around control. I told you I needed time to think, I said. You've had time, Vanessa said sharply. This is getting ridiculous. Lawrence just wants to help you. I cut her off. Help me, I repeated, voice quiet but firm. You keep using that word, but what exactly does it mean when the person being helped isn't the one asking for it? Marcus's smile faltered. Mom, I'm trying to make sure you're okay. You've been selling your furniture, making strange decisions? I sold my furniture, I said, because I needed space to see things clearly. He frowned, confusion flickering into irritation. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Maybe that's the problem, I said. Maybe things should be hard when someone's asking for control they don't deserve. The air went still. Even Vanessa seemed caught off guard by my tone. Then Marcus leaned back, his voice tightening. Mom, this isn't up for debate. You're not managing things well. I'm stepping in whether you like it or not. I looked at him, this grown man sitting across from me, speaking to me like a manager reprimanding an employee. For a fleeting second, I saw his father's face in his, the same arrogance, the same hunger to dominate when he felt cornered. I had walked away from that kind of man once. I could do it again. Not signing anything, I said simply. His jaw clenched. Mom, no, my voice was firm now. I've read those documents. Do you think I don't know what power of attorney means? You'd have control over everything, my accounts, my property, my pension. You could sell this house tomorrow and I wouldn't even know until it was gone. Vanessa sighed loudly. You're overreacting. We're just trying to simplify things for you. It's called being responsible. Responsible. Echoed. That's what you call it. Marcus pushed the papers closer to me, his tone sharp now. Stop being paranoid, Mom. I'm doing this for your own good. For my own good, I repeated, almost laughing. Funny, that's what you said right before you stole $1,200 from my account, and when you opened a credit card in my name, and when you used my ID for your electricity bills. Tell me, Marcus, was all that for my good too? Color drained from his face, his mouth open, but no words came out. Vanessa stared at me, her eyes wide, then turned to him. What is she talking about? He tried to recover. Mom, that's crazy, you must be confused. I'm not confused, I said calmly. I have the bank reports, I have the credit statements, I have everything. For a long moment, silence filled the room, then Marcus's expression hardened, his voice dropping to a low growl. Shouldn't have done that? Done what? I asked. Gone behind my back, he said. Talk to people, you don't understand how this looks, you're making a fool of yourself. I met his stare without blinking. No, Marcus, for the first time in my life I'm not. He stood suddenly, pushing the chair back so hard it scraped against the floor. This conversation's over, he said. We'll talk when you've come to your senses. No, I said, we won't. He glared at me. Think you can just cut me off, after everything I've done for you? The words came out before I could stop them. You mean after everything I've done for you? His mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. You'll regret this, Mom, you always do. Then he turned and walked out, Vanessa following close behind, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on the end of a sentence I hadn't wanted to write. The door slammed. Silence returned. I sank into my chair, breathing hard. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something that felt dangerously close to freedom. At night, as I looked around my bare kitchen, I realized something profound. Marcus thought I was weak because I was quiet. He mistook endurance for fragility. He didn't understand that silence isn't the absence of strength, it's where strength gathers before it strikes. He believed the war was over, but I knew better. The war had just begun. And this time, I wasn't fighting to save him. I was fighting to save myself. Monday morning, the air in the neighborhood felt different, sharper, colder, as if the world itself could sense what was about to unfold. I woke up before dawn, the silence heavy in my chest. For the first time in my life, I didn't pray for patience or understanding. I prayed for courage. I spent the morning organizing every document I had collected, the fraudulent withdrawals, the fake credit card, the utility bill with Marcus's address, laid them across the table like a surgeon preparing instruments for an operation. Every page was a scar I had ignored for too long. When I was done, I placed everything into a large envelope and wrote one word on the front, proof. Then I picked up the phone and called Miss Sanchez. Mrs. Carter, he said when he answered, his tone calm and steady. I was expecting to hear from you. I'm ready, I told him. It's time to move forward. Didn't need to ask what I meant. Come in this afternoon, we'll take the next step. The walk to his office felt like walking towards something irreversible. The city around me buzzed with life, cars honking, people talking, dogs barking, but I moved through it as if underwater. Every step carried the weight of 63 years, the years of struggle of motherhood, of believing that love could fix what only accountability could. When I entered Mr. Sanchez's office, he stood and smiled gently. You brought the documents? I placed the envelope on his desk, all of them. He opened it, scanned a few pages, then looked up at me with quiet respect. You've built a strong case, Mrs. Carter, stronger than most people could ever manage alone. It wasn't strength, I said. It was survival. He nodded. That's often the same thing. We went over everything in detail, dates, signatures, bank records, account numbers. And he finished, he closed the folder and said, with this, you have two options. You can file criminal charges or we can begin with a civil lawsuit. The latter gives him a chance to repay what he took before this becomes public. I stared at the papers, thinking about what Marcus had become. If I give him that chance, he'll see it as weakness, I said. He always has. Mr. Sanchez studied me for a moment. Then what do you want, Mrs. Carter? The question hung in the air. I'd spent my entire life making decisions based on what other people wanted, patients, supervisors, my son, but for once, the answer came easily. I want my life back, I said. And I want the truth to have my name on it, not his. He nodded. Then we file both. The papers were submitted that same afternoon. When I signed my name at the bottom of the final page, I felt something lift from my chest, a heaviness I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for decades. Mr. Sanchez explained that Marcus would be notified within 72 hours. The letter would include every detail of his fraud, every dollar accounted for, every document attached. It would be impossible to deny. As I left the office, a quiet thought crossed my mind. This is the moment he learns who his mother really is. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, watching the lights of passing cars slide across the bare walls. I imagined Marcus's reaction when he received the notification, the disbelief, the anger, the panic. For years, I had given him everything. My time, my money, my forgiveness. Now, I was giving him something different. The truth, wrapped in the cold precision of legal language. The next morning, my phone started ringing before breakfast. It was him. I let it ring twice before answering. Mom, he said, his voice strained, almost frantic. What is this? I just got a letter from some lawyer saying you're suing me. I am, I said evenly. This is insane, he shouted. You're ruining my life? No, Marcus, I said quietly. You did that yourself. He laughed barely, kind of laugh that hides fear. You think you can scare me with papers? I'll fight this, Mom. I'll tell everyone you've lost your mind. People already think you're... Careful, I interrupted. Because I have everything. The banks, the utilities, the credit bureaus, they all confirmed it. And this isn't about stories anymore, it's about evidence. The silence that followed was long and uneven. I could hear him breathing heavily, the way people do when they've run out of lies. Finally, he said, I was helping you, you were struggling. Stop, I said sharply. Stop pretending this was love. You used me because you could. You thought I'd never fight back. Mom, I'm done talking, Marcus, I said, my voice steady now. From now on, everything goes through my lawyer. And I hung up. I sat there for a while, staring at my reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who'd once been afraid of confrontation. She looked older, yes, but sharper, steadier, alive in a way she hadn't been in years. The following days were a blur of paperwork and silence. Mark stopped calling, but I could feel his presence everywhere. In the sideways looks from neighbors, the sudden quiet in our small church group, the whispers I pretended not to hear. Word was spreading. Then, on Friday evening, I saw it, a post on Marcus's social media. A photo of him and Vanessa at a fancy restaurant, both smiling. Wine glasses raised. The caption read, sometimes, letting go of toxic people is the healthiest thing you can do. Protect your peace. Family doesn't always mean love. The comments were filled with sympathy, support, admiration. Dozens of people praising him for being strong, for putting himself first. I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands didn't shake. My eyes didn't blur. I just felt tired. Tired of how easy it was for people to believe lies wrapped in beautiful words. At night, I didn't respond. I didn't try to explain or defend myself. I didn't post my side of the story, because I had something far stronger than online sympathy, truth, sealed and signed, ready to speak for itself. 3 weeks later, Mr. Sanchez called. He's been served, he said, and his lawyer just contacted us. They want to negotiate. I didn't answer right away. The part of me that was still a mother wanted to ask if Marcus was okay. The part of me that had finally become a woman in her own right said only, let them talk. He chuckled softly. You sound like someone who's been waiting a long time to be heard. I have, I said, and now I don't need to raise my voice. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset melt into the horizon, I thought about the strange poetry of it all. For years, Marcus had believed he was controlling my life. He thought he was pulling the strings, but in truth, all he'd done was teach me how to cut them. The silent war was over. The reckoning had begun. It was strange how quiet the world became after a person's truth finally came into the light. The kind of quiet that didn't feel like peace yet, more like the breath held between thunder and echo. For days after Marcus was served, the phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts, no knocks on the door. Even the neighbors seemed to avoid my gaze when I went to fetch the mail, as if the truth might rub off on them like dust. I didn't mind the silence. Silence, I had learned, was honest. It didn't pretend. But the stillness didn't last. On the fourth day, Mr. Sanchez called. "Mrs. Carter," he said in his measured tone, "we've received a counteroffer from your son's attorney." I didn't say anything. "They're proposing an out-of-court settlement," he continued. "He's offering to return the money, $17,000 in total, plus $5,000 for damages paid over 6 months. In return, agree not to pursue criminal charges." I took a deep breath. The number wasn't what mattered. It could have been $17 or $17 million. What mattered was what came next. "And what about the public statement?" I asked. There was a pause on the line. "He's resisting that part." "Then there's nothing to talk about," I said. Mr. Sanchez chuckled softly, the kind of laugh that comes from admiration disguised as disbelief. "I suspected you'd say that." "Let him resist," I said. "He's been resisting the truth his whole life." 3 days later, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the table. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was before I answered. "Mom," Mark said, his voice thin, almost hoarse. "Please, we need to talk. I told you everything goes through my lawyer." "I'm not calling about that," he said quickly. I don't want things to get worse." Could hear the strain in his voice, the edge of panic that no amount of charm could cover. For the first time, he didn't sound like the man in control. He sounded like a boy again, small, uncertain, afraid. "Things are already what they are," I said quietly. "You made your choices." "I made mistakes," he said, almost pleading. "But you don't have to ruin me. Please, Mom, Vanessa's freaking out. My job's asking questions. I can't lose everything." "You already lost me," I said. Silence, heavy, brittle silence. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "You're really doing this to your own son?" I closed my eyes. "No, Marcus, you did this to yourself." He exhaled sharply, a mix between a sigh and a curse. "Fine," he said coldly. "If you want war, you'll get it." And then he hung up. The next day, his war began. It started online. Marcus posted a long message on social media, claiming that his aging mother had been manipulated by money-hungry liars and was confused by dementia. He painted himself as the dutiful son under attack from a paranoid woman. Comments came fast. Sympathy, outrage, support for him. People said things like, "Stay strong, Marcus," and "It's always sad when parents turn bitter with age." I read every word without emotion. The Gloria Carter they were talking about wasn't me. She was a ghost, a caricature of the woman I used to be when I let Marcus define me. What Marcus didn't realize was that every word he posted, every attempt to rewrite the story, only deepened the hole he was digging, because while he was trying to win sympathy with lies, I was winning proof with silence. By the end of the week, the bank's investigation concluded. Mr. Sanchez called me with the results. "They've confirmed the fraud," he said. "Multiple unauthorized withdrawals, the credit card, the utility accounts, all trace back to him." I said nothing. I just nodded even though he couldn't see me. "Mrs. Carter," he added gently, "been doing this a long time. Most people in your position settle quietly. They forgive, they retreat, you're different." "I'm tired of surviving quietly," I said. "Silence may keep you safe, but it never sets you free." A week later, Marcus's silence finally returned. His online post stopped. The fake concern disappeared. Even his friends, those same voices that had cheered him on, had started to drift away. The story was out. Evidence had leaked through the grapevine of the community, the way truth always does when someone tries too hard to bury it. Alice came by one afternoon holding a pie she'd baked. "You did it, Gloria," she said, setting it down. "He's been avoiding everyone, can't show his face at the club. Word is, even his boss knows now." I didn't smile, I didn't feel victorious, I just felt clean. The next morning, Mr. Sanchez called again. "He's agreed," he said. "Full repayment plus the damages plus the statement. He'll post it by the end of the week." I closed my eyes. "Make sure he signs it first." "He already has." When Friday arrived, the post appeared on Marcus's page. "I want to acknowledge that I engaged in financial misconduct against my mother, Gloria Carter. The accusations in her case are true. I deeply regret my actions and accept full responsibility for the harm I caused." The comments this time were different. Shock, disappointment, a few angry emojis. The people who had once praised him now turned away. I didn't read the rest. I didn't need to. I turned off my phone and stepped outside. Evening was warm, the air thick with the scent of jasmine. The world didn't feel heavy anymore. Later that night, when the first payment hit my account, I stared at the bank balance for a long time. I thought it would feel like justice. But what I felt was something quieter, relief, yes, but also mourning. Because even though I'd won, I had lost something I could never get back. The illusion that love was unconditional. A month later, Marcus called again. I didn't plan to answer, but some part of me, some remnant of the mother I used to be, picked up anyway. His voice was different, smaller. "Mom," he said, "I finished the payments. Everything's settled." "I know," I said. "Can we talk, not about the money, about us?" I hesitated. The wind outside rattled the window frame softly, like a reminder that some doors, once opened, let the cold back in. "Marcus," I said finally, "the son I raised, the one who knew right from wrong, he's gone. Maybe one day you'll find him again, but I can't go looking for him anymore." He didn't answer. Only his breathing filled the line. Then quietly he said, "I'm sorry." "I know," I whispered. "I just wish you'd been sorry before you were caught." There was another long pause, then a click. The line went dead. I sat there for a while, staring at the phone. I didn't cry. I didn't feel hate. What I felt was something simpler, acceptance. The kind that doesn't erase pain but lets it sit beside you without demanding your attention. That night, I opened the windows and let the summer air drift in. The house, stripped bare of its old furniture and ghosts, felt bigger than ever. Marcus's shadow was gone from these walls. The silence he'd left behind wasn't empty anymore. It was freedom. And for the first time in my life, I slept not as someone's mother, simply as Gloria. It took me another 3 months to gather the courage to leave that house. Not because I was afraid, but because I had spent a lifetime tying my worth to those 4 walls, every scratch, every faded picture frame, every echo of Marcus's childhood laughter still living somewhere in the drywall. But there comes a moment when the past becomes too heavy to carry, when you realize that staying in a place built on memories is not the same as living. One morning, I packed a single suitcase. Just clothes, my documents, and a small wooden box containing the only photograph I had of Marcus as a boy smiling, missing his front teeth, holding a toy fire truck. I didn't take anything else. The rest could stay. I used part of the settlement money to buy a small house near the sea. A quiet coastal town 3 hours south, where the waves sounded like slow breathing and strangers still said good morning on the street. When I arrived, the realtor handed me the keys and said, "Welcome home, Mrs. Carter." Home. The word felt fragile at first, like it might break in my hands. But as I stepped inside and opened the windows, the salty air filled the rooms, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: weightlessness. House was small, 2 bedrooms, a tiny garden, a porch facing the ocean. I painted the walls myself, the same pale blue as the morning sky, and filled the shelves with books instead of bills. I planted wildflowers in the yard, though I knew the sea wind would probably scatter their petals before spring. I didn't mind. Beauty, I'd learned, didn't have to last to matter. Each morning, I woke early and made coffee, sipping it slowly on the porch while watching the tide crawl across the sand. The rhythm of the waves reminded me that life, no matter how broken, always finds a way to return to itself. Sometimes Mrs. Alice called. Sometimes she visited, bringing gossip and laughter that filled the space like sunlight. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, I received a letter from Marcus. He never asked for forgiveness outright. He just wrote about small things, work, the weather. He'd been volunteering at a local shelter. I didn't always reply, but I kept his letters in a drawer, not out of hope, but because they reminded me of something essential, that people can fall far and still learn how to walk again. Forgiveness, I discovered, wasn't something you gave to someone else to make them feel better. It was something you gave yourself to stop bleeding from wounds that no longer deserve to hurt. One night, sitting by the window with the ocean breeze brushing against my face, I realized I had stopped waiting for an apology, for love, for time to rewind itself. I didn't need any of it anymore. The woman who had once begged to be understood had become a woman who finally understood herself. I wrote in my journal that night, not for Marcus, not for anyone else, but for me. True love doesn't mean giving everything until there's nothing left. It means knowing when to stop giving what was never meant to be taken. And when I closed the notebook, I smiled, because I knew deep down that I had finally come home, not to a place, but to myself. The days here passed softly. I spend mornings tending my garden, afternoons reading on the porch, and evenings watching the sunset paint the horizon gold. I live simply, but every moment feels full, like breathing for the first time after years of holding my breath. Sometimes the sea carries voices, laughter, or the sound of children playing in the distance, and I catch myself smiling. Life, after all, keeps moving, even when we think we can't. There's one thing I've learned from this long road, from the betrayals, the loneliness, the quiet triumph, it's this: peace is not something someone else gives you. It's something you decide to keep. And I've decided to keep it. So if you're listening to my story, wherever you are, whoever you are, I hope it reminds you of something simple yet powerful: that no matter how deep the hurt, you are still allowed to begin again. That standing up for yourself isn't cruelty, it's clarity. And that love, when it's real, doesn't require you to disappear to prove it. To those who have walked this journey with me, thank you for listening, for feeling, for understanding. May your days be gentle, your homes be filled with laughter, and may you always find the strength to protect your own peace. With all my heart, Glory Carter.